Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Our guest is a returning star, Brian R. Solomon, and they're going to talk about the fans and what they think about wrestling yesterday and today. I know what the fans used to do yesterday. There used to be this lady named Hatpin Mary. And this is true. I may be a funny guy, but I'm being serious here. She was famous for running up the aisle and sticking a hat pin in the butt of all the big guy wrestlers. People would laugh. Wasn't so funny to Buddy Rogers, though. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I gotta find my Brill Cream. Good evening, or good day, or good afternoon, whatever time of day it is. Hi, I'm Bob Smith, the former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and this is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I hope everybody's doing great. I am doing great because it's been a long time coming, as this song used to say, and we're going to make a couple changes to our show. Before we do, I just want to announce that tonight's guest is the esteemed Brian R. Solomon, the author of a great book 2 years ago and a great book this year. We're going to talk all about that. Plus, our look at, wrestling fans and how their psychology has changed over the last few decades. It's both pleasing and disturbing all at the same time, as far as I'm concerned. But in any event, I want to talk about the show. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. In January, we started our third year here, and it's been nothing but upbeat. I've exceeded my own expectations tenfold. We've gotten a little national publicity. I've gained enough traction as a media member that I was able to do a few interviews, with people like NPR and stuff like that, and a newspaper in upstate New York and other things that have been going on. And I'm really, excited to be back as part of the wrestling scene. I thought the show's been going fine. I have no complaints about anything. But if you know me, I'm somewhat of a miserable fuss budget, and I'm always looking for ways to make the show better. But then again, I'm also a businessman, and I look at numbers. Us podcasters tend to look at ratings and downloads and other forms to tell you, how you're doing, how's the show going. Everything's been really nice. I mean, especially last year was a real coming of age for our show in year two. Certain guests would come on and we would do great, both on the Outdated Entertainment Hour and this show. If there's one thing that's been lacking on this program, it's my wish to bounce my ideas, thoughts, jokes, and everything else on somebody else. In other words, I have a co-host, right? Many of the top wrestling shows have more than one person talking. And I think a little me goes a long way, But, it's been a successful blend so far with the interviews and everything else, and the interviews are going to continue. But I'm here to announce we are having our first co-host of the Outdated Wrestling Hour, and his name, and you know him very well by now, is Joe Puccio. Joe lives not far from where we record, and it just seems like a natural fit. All the shows we've done together have been real successes, and I think our blend is really good. And he's going to take over the co-hosting spot beginning with next week's show. So I hope you'll stick around and enjoy our new format. Now, here's what we're going to do. Joe and I are going to kibitz, talk, joke around a little bit at the beginning of each show, do some current wrestling now and again, which we don't do a whole lot of, or talk about some old-time person that may be in the news or something like that. And then we're going to go into our interview segment just like we always have. We're also going to time the show a little differently to keep the show hopefully within an hour or so. We're finding out that our most listened to shows are easily digestible, around an hour. So we're going to try to keep it like that. unless something really special happens, if John Cena comes walking in, I'm gonna have to give him as much time as he wants, you know? But in any event, I think Joe is a great personality. He's really learned. The guy knows everything about entertainment and wrestling. And next week, I'm gonna let you know a little bit about his wrestling past. We'll talk a little bit, welcome him to the show, and I hope you will too. So everybody welcome our co-host from this point on in the Outdated Wrestling Hour, Joe Puccio, because he's a great guy. And I think we have a really good flow between the two of us. And all of our usual guests that you're used to hearing were all coming back. So, the format only changes in the first bit of the show, in the first part of the show, because the second part will be me interviewing somebody in the news or a great old timer or something like that. So, it won't change all that much. It'll just be better. It'll be more fun, a little looser. Hopefully, our sense of humor will continue to blossom here. Bob 20 minutes from now will stay. We have heard your words about him. He's going to stick around. Lucretia, unfortunately, decided she'd had enough. She's going away. But we are going to keep going with the Outdated Wrestling Hour, and we hope to make it just a little more entertaining. A little more lighthearted too. Again, the idea of this show is to give thanks, pay gratitude to all the great wrestling we saw as we were growing up in through my PWI years into the 90s or so, even the early 2000s. Like we were talking about a couple episodes ago. The year 2000 is 25 years ago. In any event, so welcome Joe Puccio starting next week. I'm really looking forward to it. And this week we got the amazing Brian R. Solomon. You may know him from PWI or his award-winning book about the Sheik. Actually, multi-award-winning book. My favorite wrestling book of all time. You may know he's got a book in the works about Gorilla Monsoon. Can't wait for that later this year. It's going to be a great year for wrestling books. And he and I are going to talk about, all kinds of things, including, like I said, the psychology of the wrestling fan. What's on their mind these days? We'll go over a recent incident that had me a little disturbed, and I found out Brian felt the same way. So hang on. We're going to have a little commercial break here for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. And then we're going to bring back one of my favorite people in the wrestling biz, Brian R. Solomon. You go somewhere, you're doing the wrong thing. Don't do the wrong thing. That's what everybody else does. Do the right thing. Hang around. Jeez. Well, I reckon it's time to do a little bit of an update for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Let's see what shows you can enjoy several times every week. They've got a veritable cornucopia of wrestling podcasts, so let's dig into it. Pretty much the flagship of WrestleCopia is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Join host Ray Russell as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Mulkymania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express, they've got it all. Tune in and get a big piece of history on the Wrestling Memory Grenade. If you like nostalgia, this one's for you. The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. What a legend Bob Roop is, and he welcomes you to the Wrestling Stoop as he shares stories, historical moments, and all kinds of memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker. And he got wild near the end of his career. Find out all of it on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. One of the most unique wrestling podcasts anywhere is DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan as he travels back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. He's spent decades studying the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to you. You'll learn something on every single show, I guarantee it. That's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. That's RE-View. Brings in a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the program as he goes back in time to watch and review pro wrestling from years goes by. Get the breakdown, hear never-before-heard stories, and feel free to watch along with them. It's worth it, let me tell you, especially if you're a USWA fan. Enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. When this show started not all that long ago, it was called Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now, it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, two of the great stars from Memphis and beyond. You'll learn all about them. Hear great old school stories, stuff you've never heard before, definitely on Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of my personal favorite podcasts out there is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, a meat and potatoes name for a anything but a meat and potatoes show. Join him as he reminisces about pro wrestling history with a variety of legendary guests and topics. And what I like about him, he knows everything about Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bedlam, and the WWA. But that's only part of what you'll hear on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. It was the WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro, the Monday Night War, the Ratings War, the NWO, the Attitude Era. Now, there's a podcast all about it. It's called Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. They break it down with episode reviews, you name it. If you want to know all about that classic ratings war, listen to Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. One of the most unique podcasts you'll hear anywhere is the Other Ship podcast. It's a pop culture contest with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, music, TV, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics in roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other content concepts. As they say, laugh your ass off on this voyage aboard the Other Ship. New episodes are in the bag for the Captain's Corner pod. Join Captain Nick as he presents the Captain's Corner podcast. It features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest goings on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Nothing else quite like the Captain's Corner pod. Also on the WrestleCopia network, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. Hosts Barry and Captain Nick present the Glory Days GrappleCon podcast featuring memories and special interviews with wrestling stars of the past and even those of today. There's even more at WrestleCopia, a podcast called TR Shocks the World, the WCNN News, and the Power Hour. It's quite a lineup with more new podcasts joining all the time. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you get involved? It's pretty easy. Go to their constantly updated website, WrestleCopia.com. Click a few buttons and take a voyage into wrestling's past, present, and future. Get it all at WrestleCopia. Okay, guys, this is another one of these shows where Brian and I have been talking for about 15 minutes, and it was great. And I wish I had hit the record button because it was a lot of fun. We're going to have to try to get the vibe going again. We have here with us once again, and I'm really proud, one of the really great writers who multiple award-winning author of the Sheik Blood and Fire 2 years ago. And this year he's got a new book coming out, which we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes. He's also works for PWI still. And he's a podcaster just like me with the great Shut Up and Wrestle podcast. It's Brian R. Solomon. It's always good to see you. How you doing?
It's good to be here, Bob. Thanks so much for having me back on once again.
Yeah, it's always fun. And by the way, we did one of my favorite Outdated Entertainment Hour podcasts, which was about B films. We're going to have to follow that up sometime because it's like we just scratched the surface. I mean, there's so much great seedy entertainment out there.
Yeah, it's a never-ending fountain for sure.
It really was. It's astounding how prolific some of those directors and B actresses were in those days. But anyway, we're here to talk about wrestling. But first, let me give you the floor. Tell me what you're up to. This is going to be another big year for you. And have the floor and let people know what you're doing.
Yeah, well, my biography of Gorilla Monsoon, Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon, the writing portion of that is done. So now we're in kind of the post-writing, pre-publishing phase, which is photography and editing and that kind of thing. And I just recently got the really, really good news that WWE is going to be providing some photography for the book, which is a big deal because they never used to do stuff like that for outside projects and things. And they didn't even ask for approval. So for people that were worried that they were going to get their hands on the book, it's as simple as this. If they weren't happy with the book, they would have just said, nope, we're not giving you photos. And they did not say that. So I'm very happy. Like, we needed them for some things because there's some things that no one's going to have photography of. No one's going to have shots of Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon on the primetime set, things like that. So that's been exciting. My own podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, has been going really well. I just had Adam Pearce on as a guest. And full speed ahead.
Yeah, everything's going really great. And by the way, I really enjoyed the show with Dave Meltzer. I thought that was kind of revelatory. I think you got him to kind of speak off the cuff a little bit, and I really enjoyed the honesty of that show. I thought it was pretty cool.
That's what I like to do with the show is I try to take it in directions that not everyone else does when they have some of these people on, or even get some of these people to talk about stuff they don't normally talk about, or at least not anymore. Like I had when I had Jim Cornette on, and these people that can be inflammatory to certain audiences, and just remind people, hey, we all love wrestling. And in fact, in my area, we all love old wrestling. Even
Mhm.
Dave Meltzer, Dave spends his business is covering the current professional wrestling, but he's also one of the best historians that pro wrestling's ever had. So I wanted to get him on there just to talk about history, which he doesn't get as much of a chance to do anymore. He's too busy fighting all these battles on Twitter, whatever he does these days. And when you take that all away and you just sit down and say, hey, let's talk about, hey, did you see that George Hackenschmidt footage that just popped up a few
Right.
months ago? What'd you think about that? You know what I mean? And people, I think, find that refreshing, or I hope so.
I know I do, that's for sure. Well, again, it's kind of a golden era for wrestling podcasting right now because there's about 10 shows that I juggle just to get them in with my busy schedule. It's tough, but it's good stuff out there, and from nostalgia to current events. And speaking of Meltzer, I just want to say this about him one more time. People confuse and conflate his opinion, his five-star matches, his star system to to his reporting, but they're two different things.
Right.
One is an opinion, and nobody in the last 40 years in wrestling has done more hard-edged, straight-laced reporting than Dave Meltzer. I don't know how anybody could dispute that.
Right. And I think I chalk it up to just a lack of media literacy. And I don't mean that to insult people. People are not being taught media literacy to enough of a degree, because
Or civics, but we won't even get into that.
civics, yes, but that has nothing to do with poor Dave. But the
Right,
media
right.
literacy does impact him, because I don't know what's so hard to grasp about that, but apparently for a lot of people it is, that opinion is a perfectly valid subgenre of journalism. Oh, so it really all just comes down to being able to tell the difference between opinion and unbiased journalism. You would think everyone would be able to do that, but even when it comes to news outlets, like a lot of people talk about, people cannot tell the difference between an opinion piece and a news piece. And then sometimes when they can identify it as opinion, they somehow think that it should not be allowed, as if opinion writing is not one of the foundations and linchpins of journalism. So, like I always say about Dave, my line is always, the problem is not that Dave Meltzer existed. The problem is that there wasn't 10 of him, because that's really what you need, is a multitude of opinions and views and kind of a whole ecosystem. And we've had that develop more now, but with various other complicated problems. But I think he's a treasure. I think he's a value to the business. And I think once he's not doing it anymore, there is absolutely nothing that is going to suitably replace him, period.
I have to agree with that. I really do. I mean, shoot. I mean, who else? Even the early '90s when I was with Peter Brown, I'm reading who else is reporting that the Birmingham promotion just moved to a different arena. I mean, even just little nuts and boltsy meatballs, of news and nuggets. That kind of stuff was totally unavailable other than the Wrestling Observer.
Right. And most of the people that are doing it now, they wouldn't even call themselves journalists. They're thinking of it as content creation and all that kind of stuff. And granted, Dave Meltzer makes a lot of money doing what he does, but that they just look at it, I think, more of as like a hustle. Like, I'm a content creator and I'm trying to monetize things first and foremost. And I don't think journalistic integrity or even the job of journalism is of any major importance to them whatsoever. I saw won't name names on this, but I saw somebody who does this sort of thing, who does a lot of it behind a paywall. That's fine. I have no problem with that at all. Journalists should make money for what they do. But this person was ranting and raving over people reporting on the news he's putting behind a paywall, but reporting on it in other places where it's free, which is a perfectly acceptable journalistic practice. If the New York Times puts something behind a paywall on their site, anybody else that has access to that can report on the news that they're reporting on, even if they got the exclusive scoop.
Mhm.
But when you only look at it as a hustle, when you only look at it as this is taking food off my table, then that's the kind of response you have when you don't look at it as a journalist would look at it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's also, I look at it the same way that you're talking about with the sorry state of these so-called wrestling news websites that are all 800 of them that copy from each other and don't really break news, and it's, like I said, the SEO thing, just headlines that don't match the stories, it's just
Mhm.
it's kinda sorry. That's the way I put it, and I just tend to ignore it all, I really do.
I
So
got out of doing because after I left WWE, I was doing a lot of in the early days of news online and aggregate websites and things like 2007, 8, 9. And I had to stop doing it because all they cared about was SEO, and it was just making me sick. Like they didn't care about the content. All they cared about was Google search words and all this kind of crap. And I'm sorry, that's just not my world. Maybe I'm a relic, I'm a dinosaur, but I'll happily be a dinosaur then.
But that's 2 of us that are gonna be oil someday because I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, I'm the same way. I can't I had some really smart people teach me really smart things, and I became a good writer thanks to them. I am not gonna besmirch the work they did with me to make a buck. I'm not doing it. It's like, I feel like I owe it to some of the people I started in the newspaper business with. It's just the way I feel about it.
I knew the business was changing because for years and years, going back to being a student and in my career, I was beaten over the head with the idea that
Mhm.
quality is more important than quantity. And that was beaten into my brain, quality over quantity, quality over quantity. And once I realized I was literally being told in these words, quantity over quality, the reverse, I said, this is not for me anymore. Sorry.
No, I hear you. And when I was a little cub reporter in my hometown, somebody said, "We're not here we're not here to help, and we're not here to hurt. We're here to report." And that's a credo I think not enough people live by anymore.
Right.
Just here's what happened. That's it. It's like now everything is blown up to such an extreme, and like you say, the talk shows get a hold of things, and it. I hate it when people taint the news, or any news, even if it's sports. Just don't taint it. Just report it. That's enough. It used to be enough.
Or when people will jump all over him, I'm talking about Dave or anybody. Anytime there's a mistake, oh, this guy is why anybody pays this man for anything, and you said this, but it's really this. This is a mistake. Every single news outlet in the history of the world makes mistakes in every single publication they put out.
Hmm.
The New York Times, every single day, there's a retraction section where you could look and find all the mistakes they made that they own up to and they report on. That is part of the process of journalism that you make mistakes because it's done by people.
You'll like this one. Back when I was with PWI, the New York Times did an article on our magazines, the Stanley Weston publications. So they show up at the office. A photographer was there. A writer sat down and talked to Stanley and Stu Sachs, and the article comes out. It was it wasn't a puff piece. It just explained, why this magazine company was so successful. And they talked to editor in chief Stu Sachs, Sachs. They misspelled his name throughout the entire article. I
Yeah,
mean, they were there. They had magazines to take with them. You know, mistakes happen,
they
even
have.
to New York Times.
Yes, especially when you're putting out that much stuff. They happen all the time. And that's why I'm very tempted. There's times when we'll do in the wrestling news, which I do with Arcadian Vanguard, when we make mistakes, the next day we'll always put a correction whenever it happens and we'll make a note of it. And it's very tempting. I know in the beginning we wanted to say, the first time it happened, we'll make sure this doesn't happen again or something to that effect. And I was like, I don't want to say that because it's going to happen again and again and again
Hmm.
and again because we're all human beings and you don't want to set us up for that disappointment of the listener when it happens again, because it is going to happen again, because we're not computers. And as long as we own up to it, correct ourselves, we're transparent about it, that's all that matters.
I agree. I agree. Particularly when we're talking about pro wrestling.
Yes.
Particularly because there's a much more serious thing. But you know what? The reason I had you on the show, you and I were on Facebook one day,
Right.
and here's what started the conversation between Brian and myself. I'm at home watching the second edition of Saturday Night's Main Event. And I'm watching, and I'm impressed with him. I'm watching Jacob Fatu against Braun Strowman. Two big men match, right? And the end of the match, Fatu just brutalizes Strowman. I mean, in storyline, okay, guys? I mean, he did like that ass bump into the corner where his head was for about 9 or 10 times. Did that moonsault off the top rope about 5 or 6 times, leaving him a bloody mess. It was really well done in terms of, boy, this is scary. He's really hurting him. It looked bad. It seemed completely wild and out of place. But I'm watching the fans. Back in the day, Fatu was actually disqualified for shoving a referee or throwing him out of the ring.
Right.
I hate to say back in the day, but I am older than dirt, but the fans would be outraged at such brutality that was displayed there. No, they weren't. They wanted more of it. They were salivating for more of it. You know, Fatu's leaving the ring, and the fans are literally on their feet chanting one more time, give him another moonsault, hurt him more, hurt him more. And I'm sitting at home thinking, wrestling fans don't think the way I did when I was a fan. They just don't. Everything has changed. It's like they like the envelope pushed, even to the extent, and particularly when AEW matches are concerned, actual physical pain. You know, they get off. They kind of get off on the fact that today's wrestlers are willing to literally hurt each other.
Yes.
For a pop.
That death match. That's that death match crowd.
The deathmatch mentality, yeah.
And they will make fun of you. I've had this happen. They will make fun of you for being concerned for the safety of the wrestlers.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. Somebody said to me once, like, why do you care? You know what? And my response was just sort of like, and not in a sarcastic way, but because I'm a human being, and that is a fellow human being. Like I'm a little uncomfortable having to explain this to you because I don't like to see people get hurt for real, because I, find that to be objectionable. These things should not have to be explained. But I think part of it is, I have to say, and I don't think this is the case for me, but as I think about it over the years, and I'm going to ask you this, do you think part of this is related to not so much people changing? Because it's very tempting to say, oh, everybody is, they don't care as much today and they're immune to violence and this. And it could be that. But could it be because wrestling now being so much more out in the open, the nature of what it is, that they know what they're watching isn't real? They know the guy's not getting hurt, or they have a reasonable assumption. They know they're not trying to hurt each other. So they can get this perverse pleasure out of it, almost like when you watch a Roadrunner cartoon and you love when Wile E. Coyote falls off the cliff. You're not worried about Wile E. Coyote. You're not saying, oh, stop the insanity. Don't, Yosemite Sam, Bugs Bunny, go easy on Yosemite Sam. Don't blow him up. He might get hurt. Right. Could it be part of that? Whereas in the old days, they did buy into it a lot more and they were legitimate. So when they were outraged, they were legitimately concerned about the well-being of that wrestler. Whereas now they're just sort of like, well, we know he's not really hurting him, so we might as well just be bloodthirsty and get all this out of our system because it's not real anyway.
I look at it a little differently, and I'm going to quote, of all people, Phil Mushnick, who, during his crusade against WWE decades ago, which I don't agree with, and I still don't, and I don't agree with anything he writes anymore, but he did say this, and I agreed with it. He said, pro wrestling, and I'm paraphrasing, pro wrestling used to be good guy versus bad guy. Right. Now it's bad guy versus worse guy, which is a great quote.
which is kind of like what Bob Costas has complained about over the years, because Bob Costas, unlike Phil Mushnick, I don't think, Bob Costas was a huge wrestling fan. He grew up on St. Louis wrestling.
Hmm.
He was all on board with the WWF in the 80s. And then he turned on it because for similar reasons to that.
Right.
And yeah, I think it is a little, me personally, I'm uncomfortable with it. And I always have been, because I'm one of those guys. It's like, whether I believe in it or not, I want to cheer for the good guys and boo the bad guys. And there's something about uh, a fan base that seems to take pleasure in the sadistic side of things and seems to genuinely want the bad people to win and the good people to lose. Not as the exception, but as the rule, because there was always those smart-ass fans that like to cheer for superstar Billy Graham and all that kind of stuff. But when that becomes the rule, there is something that puts me off a little bit about that, where I start to get on my soapbox and wonder, like, is society broken? Like, what's happening right now? And I felt that way for a long time. Even going back to the Attitude Era, people like to romanticize it, but I feel like at that time I was a young fan. I was in my 20s, and for some, like, I started with ECW, and ECW was insane. But for some reason, I was able to accept it more from ECW because they were like this underground
Right.
kind of punk rock of wrestling. They were
Hmm.
meant to be subversive. It was when it started to seep into WWF. I got really, I could clearly understand why people responded to Austin. And, when he goes to shoot Vince, and no bullet comes out of the gun, and Vince wets his pants and all this stuff. And the whole product was changing. And I would laugh and I would cheer for things. But in the back of my head, I remember going, like, something's up here in society at large. Like, man, there's so much anger, and they're tapping into it and making money from it. But what is going on, like, between the Bruno days and even the Hogan days to this? Like, what has happened? What's been unleashed? It does make you think.
Well, let's go back to the 60s and 70s, or even the 50s and 40s. The good guy, bad guy era. Straight laced. People were frustrated with their jobs back then, just like they are now.
Right.
But they could afford to go to wrestling, and they would go to wrestling, and they may have been booing, Siegfried Stanky or Walter von Erich or whoever it may be, but that was their boss they were booing.
Yes.
People who felt they got a raw deal, like Detroit fans, were particularly anti-bad guy because they were looking at the biggest monster in the world, the Sheik.
Right. Nobody cheered the Sheik.
Nobody cheered him. Not a person. They parted ways when he came down the aisle. They got out of his way because they were scared of him. They thought he was a legitimate madman. Nobody ever pulled it off better than Sheik did. But the fact is, back then, people went to wrestling to see evil vanquished or bad guys get their comeuppance, or simply because the nice guy won. We like the nice guy. We like Ilio DiPaolo. We like Johnny Powers. We like whoever it may be in your area. It's not that way anymore. I think people admire. In a way, it's healthier because I think some people get over as wrestlers because of their athletic ability. Tiffany Stratton, now, just off the top of my head. At first, I thought she was this, girly character, but it was her athleticism that put her over. Same with Rhea Ripley. If they weren't such great athletes, nobody would be cheering them. And I think it was their talent, their physical talent, their knowledge and ability in the ring that made them stars. And I think that's healthy. I got no problem with that at all. I mean, that's why people are cheering Penta and Bryan Danielson and
Sure.
1,000 other people. It's just because they're so doggone good at what they do.
Right. But there's that undercurrent of just kind of, it gets very cynical to me, and I'll explain.
Right.
And again, I have to separate it because I'm the guy that always says you have to separate what you like from what's good for business. I can't deny that they made a ton of money on all this stuff. But I remember I was working for WWE when Kurt Angle came in. We started right around the same time. And I remember hearing a lot of things about Angle, and he's this all-American hero and all this stuff. And this great, Olympic champion, totally clean cut guy and, role model. And when they brought him in, as this smarmy, arrogant heel who thinks he's better than everyone else. I remember thinking my initial reaction was a combination of a little disappointment, thinking, oh, that sucks. They're going to take this guy. He could be the next, Bob Backlund or Jack Briscoe. And the other part of it was, well, yeah, of course. What else are they going to do with this guy? Like, they're going to boo the shit out of him. They're going to boo him out of the building. And I think that was true. If they tried to put him out there as this unironic red, white, and blue baby face, they would have killed him. And that's sad in a way.
Well, look at The Rock early on.
Right? It's like, did
They
we
hated
lose
him.
something?
Look at Roman Reigns. Look at people who were just, smile and wave at the fans. It may have worked for, Tracy Smothers back in 1989, but it's not working today. People don't want white bread. They don't want even competence doesn't count if you're, I don't know. People love anti-heroes now. They just do.
I think in an earlier era, no question, that angle would have been Danny Hodge, Jack Briscoe, Dory Funk Jr.,
Yeah.
Lou Thez, who would sometimes be a subtle heel, but I mean, nothing like what Angle did. It's just, it was a different time and you couldn't do those kind of characters anymore. But when I mentioned cynicism, that's the thing about it. And I feel like I've often said, with the Attitude Era, even though Vince McMahon was reluctant to do it, it was a manifestation, I really believe, of a lot of opinions and emotions and feelings that he himself held about society and about human nature, but he just didn't think that it would sell until he saw that it did sell. So when you see things like what happened with the Angle thing is a good example. We see this, not to turn this into politics or a socio-political show, but we see it across all things in our culture. There is a sense that whereas in the old days, people used to look up to, as you said, the competent, the elite, the high-minded people, or let's say in other fields, the people that are very extremely intellectual, or people that are good at everything or whatever, or just these these idols you look up to. And then it became, who the hell does this guy think he is? Does this guy think he's better than me? He thinks he's smarter than me? He thinks he could do all this stuff? It's almost like a weird envy. Like, I want to see people that don't make me feel less than. I want to see people that feed into my lower instincts and make me feel like that's okay. I don't have to be ashamed to feel that way. And that's who I'm going to cheer for. And that's what I'm going to like. Not the person that thinks he's better than everybody else, which in the old days would have been all the greatest heroes of wrestling, And I think that that's something that absolutely just happened in the 90s, and we're still living in that world.
Yeah, it's true. It really is true. But then again, so I like you, I was watching the Strowman thing, and I'm like, oh, man, I can't believe these fans. But then it's either the very next week, and I think it was the following Monday night that JD McDonough got hurt. Right, he got hurt flying out of the ring, and literally, I don't know if he got slammed funny or missed, but he hit the back of his head on the announcer's table, or he landed funny on it. And Michael Cole broke character and said, "Get somebody out here." He wasn't fooling around. He could tell he was hurt, legit. And he's screaming, "Get the doctors out here! Please get the." You could tell that he was being sick, just the same way he was with Jerry Lawler, like decades ago, when Lawler had that heart attack on the air.
Yes.
As it turns out, McDonough was hurt, but having that wrestler's credo, he eased his way up onto the to the ring again, and the fans applauded warmly, even though he was a heel. They realized what had happened and were rooting for him not to be hurt. So I don't know how to feel about the fans now. You got the bloodthirsty kill him Jacob Fatu segment, but then when they saw what they thought was somebody being hurt, they were glad when he wasn't.
But I think that
it's and that's within like 3 nights of each other.
But I think that feeds into what I was saying before, though, where it's the difference between what's real and what's not real.
Right.
Like that part of that tells me they were genuinely concerned because they knew that was real. Whereas if it's something where they feel like they could just let go because nobody's getting hurt, then they're going to give into their baser instincts of sadism and
Right,
wanting,
right, right.
like this feels safe. It's almost like, what it's the phenomenon of, because I'm a big horror movie fan, and I
Right.
also don't have any patience for this either. And I know I'm in the minority. Like, I'm old school even with my horror movies, okay? Especially the older I get. I like Hammer. I like Vincent Price. I like, the old Universal monster movies. I like Godzilla. I like Frankenstein. Yeah,
Fans tune into the Entertainment Hour starring Brian Solomon as we talk about these very films. You may continue.
as you know. What I always found really unsettling and disturbing, and I lived through it as a kid in the 80s and 90s, is the idea of when horror movies became a thing where you wanted to see people get killed,
Right.
where you went there to watch Jason or Freddy or Michael Myers or anybody kill these stupid, very hateable, awful people, and you couldn't wait for them to die. And then in the end of the movie, the guy's not even defeated. He comes back again. So the entire struggle of the good guys was totally pointless because nothing has been accomplished. And this apparently was the kind of horror movie that people wanted to see and wanted to eat up. And I said, well, I like the horror movies where I want the monster to lose. I'm rooting for the human beings because they are like me and I identify with them and I want them to live. Like the guy who said to me on Twitter, why do you care if a wrestler gets crippled? Because I see humans in a movie and I want to believe in them. And at the end, I would like a happy ending where, because that doesn't happen in life. So if I'm watching a movie, I would like to see the monster or the evil threat lose. And that is something, again, has long been considered very passé in horror movies, but it's the same idea in wrestling. It's like, we know Michael Myers isn't really stabbing these people, so we could cheer for it. Yeah, kill him,
But you made the point right there. The guy talking to you on Facebook, or why do you care if the wrestler gets crippled? Because you don't want to see a human being get crippled.
Right.
What in the world? What is this mindset? I hear this from I hate to say AEW, but I hear it
Why
from
do
their
you
fans
care?
all
Yeah.
the time. They love it when these guys take ridiculous risks like Darby Allin flying through a plate of glass. I think it's insane. I
Because
don't even think, and here's the worst part of it. If you look at it from wrestling psychology, it's not never the finish. It's just a spot, right? It's
right.
just a spot.
But they'll qualify it sometimes. And Darby Allin was a good example, but if they say, why do you care? And maybe I have a response. And the response that they will have often will be, well, as long as they're consenting and this is what they want to do with themselves and their job and their body, then what do you care? That no one's forcing Darby Allin to do this. He wants to do it. And my response is, yeah, but you can't just do whatever you want to do in any job you have. I mean, there should be quality control. There's supposed to be checks and balances. And that, well, who are you to tell them that? Well, it's not my job. But there are people whose job it should be
Right.
to oversee and say, you can't do this. This is not safe. This is not prudent. This is not the best practice of this industry. Do it like this. Don't do it like that. Any job has that. Just because someone wants to do something doesn't mean it's okay.
Dude, I just saw from an independent card. Nobody said where this was from. Folks, if you have children, turn them away from your podcast speaker for a moment. I just saw a clip of a match. You may have seen it too, where a wrestler is holding another wrestler's head and vomits into his mouth. And then the guy who had the vomit in his mouth took over and vomited back into the other guy's mouth. They're going to kill this business, man. It's like, what? Who came up with this? What sadist? Even if it was fake vomit, I don't know how this was. That's what it appeared to be. This clip on YouTube, and I'm like, what are you people doing? Seriously, now. I mean,
It's for
and
such
I'm looking at a railing of fans all laughing and looking at it like
right.
it's delightful. Oh, they pushed the envelope. Wow, that's great. Does the envelope need to be pushed all the time?
It's for such a strange kind of niche little audience that they're trying to please. And this is why it bothers me when some of these instincts flow into AEW, which has a very indie mentality.
It does.
Where it's such a tiny little audience of miscreants that you are playing to by doing this kind of thing. I used to see it all the time. I saw it with Joey Ryan a few years back. The,
Right.
the things that he used to do with kids there, families there. And then the funniest thing in the world, God forbid, back then, if you said anything about what he was doing, oh, you're a prude, you're a stick in the mud, what's wrong with you? Or this is right, nothing wrong with human sexuality, but like I was saying, there was, and anything like that. Oh, and I'm saying, this is a little weird, guys. This is a little weird and messed up. And then lo and behold, Joey Ryan turns out to be a piece of garbage doing bad things to people and exploiting people sexually and all this kind of stuff. And I'm over here going, this is not shocking, guys. When
Right.
this type of behavior is normalized in the business, who even thinks to do things like this and wants to do things like this? Of course he was making people uncomfortable in the ring. Of course not everybody was on board with doing this. But God forbid at the time you raise a stink about it, or you try to be the voice of reason, and in a situation like this, it's in the worst possible taste imaginable. And not only that, but I'm not the first one to say this. This is sort of like an easy criticism. It's been made by many others. But one of the wrestlers involved in that situation is an openly gay wrestler in the business, which I think is a great, tremendous forward stride that the business has made. A business that used to be built on the worst kinds of gay stereotypes
Mm-hmm.
for wrestlers that weren't even gay, that were pretending to be gay. So to have somebody who should know better, okay, lean into the worst, and it's not the first time, most offensive kind of homophobic stereotypes and behavior that, you know, plays into all the worst assumptions that people have is unimaginable. I don't understand it at all.
I don't either. Let's get away from the presenters and back to the fans, because
Yes.
some people love this kind of thing. So there are fans who go out for the most outrageous, bloody, like deathmatch organizations and, hardcore stuff. And they won't go to a WWE card because that's pansy stuff. They want to see, somebody take a pair of scissors and plunge it into somebody's shoulder.
Right.
I mean this. And it's like, and there's those backyard matches that, anything goes with fluorescent light tubes and what have you.
The Nick
There
Gage.
the Nick Gage crowd, right, exactly. And there is this element, and I don't think you should feed that element. I just don't. Because you know what? It's always hotter, faster, bigger, bloodier, more violent, more violent, more violent, more violent. And I don't think you can feed that beast. I think that particular type of fan mindset can't be quenched. I think that it's dangerous to even try to feed that beast. And for reasons not only for the physical health of the wrestlers, but I think the actual health of the promotions. Don't even veer near that stuff. Because you know what? It's never drawn a dime.
Right.
Look at history. It's never drawn a dime. Somebody show me a really, really successful deathmatch promotion. I don't think you can.
No, and probably the most extreme anybody's ever gotten, and even they didn't last long, was ECW in terms of like getting on a major cable outlet and things like that. But they weren't, they were child's play compared to this. In fact, I got so annoyed because I'm, as if you couldn't tell, I'm not a big deathmatch wrestling fan.
Me either.
I got so annoyed when I was watching the Nick Gage Dark Side of the Ring episode. I was just my wife was like, "Are you okay?" She could just see I was just so frustrated. And when I was on the PWI podcast at that time with Al Castle right after it happened, we had the same exact reaction. To hear him talk about what he thought the business was and his attitude towards it, and saying ECW was soft, ECW was for, I won't say the word, but was for wimps, and ECW is nothing, and just the way he came off, and I hate to say it this way, but as just such a mark,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who doesn't even understand what wrestling is, who watched ECW or grew up watching the thing, and it just annoyed me very much. This person who has destroyed their body, their mind, everything, and has nothing to show for it. and still doesn't seem to understand what the business is. It's extremely frustrating to watch.
I agree. That's a beautiful way you just put it because it's true. There's no reward for that. There's no reward for the mindset, and to get again, to go to such destructive levels of violence to get a pop that nobody's going to remember 3 days later. You know what I mean? It's like from pizza cutters to barbed wire baseball bats. It doesn't even matter what the violence is. It's the mindset of the fan who gets off on it, and they are not plentiful enough to base and to feed if you want a successful wrestling promotion.
Thank God.
What bugs me about AEW is that they seem to feed into that every so often. The syringe through the lip thing. I mean, come on. I mean, who are you impressing, folks? And here's the other thing. You work for WWF magazine. I worked for WCW magazine. And I know for a fact, and I'm talking about the second edition, which wasn't London's. It was Colin Bowman's version of it.
Yeah.
And back then, TBS and TNT were such tight asses about what you could show on TV and what you could even present in the magazines. They didn't want certain things broached. If it was too violent, too bloody, they didn't want it. You couldn't do it. Now it seems those same two networks, it's anything goes all the time. I've never seen such a turnaround.
And I hate to be, I never thought in my youth I would be this way, but I'm one of those people who says, what about people who watch wrestling with their kids?
Right. I mean? Yeah.
Like, how did we all become fans? I didn't start watching it when I was 30. How did we all become fans? Most of us were kids, and most of us, it was because of someone older than us, a relative, a father, grandfather, uncle, older brother, something. I had small kids. My kids were very small at the time I worked for WWE. And at that time, I wouldn't let them watch the show because that was just coming out of the Attitude Era. They were still doing a lot of that. There was Katie Vick and all that stuff.
Right.
And WWE now is in a place where I'm fine with my son watching it, and we enjoy it. My younger son, he's 7, 8 years old, but I mean, that's important. That's how you grow your audience. It's got to be at least on a mainstream level. Okay, you want to do little like ECW and little kind of underground promotions and things for an adult crowd. Okay, fine, whatever. There still should be indies, first of all, that families can go to. There still should be independent wrestling that's family safe. And on a mainstream level of pro wrestling, I'm sorry, it's got to be general audiences. It's got to be. And I know people think I'm a hypocrite because they'll say, well, what about the violence? Wrestling is a violent sport, and wrestling is this and there's that. Yeah, but that's the nature of what it is. It's fighting. It's pretend fighting. We know what we're getting ourselves into. Either you're okay with your kids watching that or not. But to add all this other stuff into it is different. Like, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But let me just, as you talk and make that really good point, I'm thinking back to the recent Cody Rhodes ladder match with Kevin Owens, which was brutal.
Yes.
And also the Drew McIntyre CM Punk match, which was even more brutal.
That was rough. Yes.
Right. Now, you're saying, that families can come and watch, and WWE courts families all the time. I mean, they still do. When they signed with Netflix, some executives said, no, it's going to be the same family safe programming you're all used to. But then I think to those two matches, I'm going, they were really rough to look at.
They've gotten a little edgier. I don't mind that so much.
How you can still have that mental stance about who you're trying to entertain and then present matches that are very realistically violent.
Well, look, Bob, you talk about starting to watch wrestling in the 70s. Pro wrestling in the 70s was drenched with blood.
Yes, it was.
And it was a lot of little boys watching it. You know what I mean? And teenage boys watching it.
Hi.
Right. And
yeah.
I'm kind of one of those people, people sometimes hate people like me, where I'll say, like, if I'm watching wrestling with my little boy, I'm more okay with him seeing Cody Rhodes putting Kevin Owens through a ladder at ringside than I would be with Trish Stratus barking like a dog on all fours.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would be with the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club. Then I certainly was with that one guy who showed up smoking weed with Jey Uso on the first Raw Netflix on television.
Mm-hmm.
Call me whatever you want to call me. It's like that's within the parameters of what wrestling is the violence without
Right.
going too far, without going too insane beyond the but all this other stuff that gets added into it, I have a bigger problem with that. I had a problem, not that I'm not Dean Wormer from Animal House, I'm not some like a Victorian old lady or something. I grew up in the 80s, but I don't need my son, who's 7 years old, to see a guy smoking weed on a wrestling show. Call me crazy.
Mm-hmm. No, you're not crazy. You're not crazy at all. So, and this is the state of current wrestling. It's trying to serve many masters, and sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it doesn't. I think WWE does a better job at presenting a more palatable product. But again, it's just the way fans reacted that got to me with the Strowman Jacob Fatu thing. It was like, one more time, one more time. They just wanted to see the brutality.
They did
And
it. They also did it with Seth Rollins recently when he was getting attacked by who's the big Maori guy they have? What's his name? He's from New Zealand. He did that thing where he just kept splashing Seth Rollins from the top rope, and this is Seth Rollins, one of the most beloved stars they have.
mm-hmm.
Unlike Strowman, who you could argue maybe they don't care about him as much. They love Rollins, but they didn't care. They love Rollins. They still wanted to see him get hurt as badly as possible.
Well, maybe it's
By Bronson Reed.
Oh, right. But let's strip it down then. Maybe they just want the action.
Yeah.
Maybe they just love the action. When they see a move they think is cool and they think it's really impressive to watch, they don't want to see it once. They want to see it 6 or 7 times.
And it's almost like they don't care who's doing it to whom. They
Right.
just
They
want
just
to
love
see
the move. Yeah.
They want to chant, "This is awesome." One of the things I talked about, this isn't violence related, but it's related to the way fans view wrestling now. Years back, about 10 years ago, when Chris Jericho made one of his returns to WWE, he'd been gone for like a year or two or whatever. He shows up and he's a babyface. The crowd is chanting, loving it. "This is awesome. This is awesome." Chris Jericho's here. Within the same segment, the Wyatt family, the old Wyatt family, they show up. The lights go off. The Wyatt family is there. And they're all surrounding Jericho and threatening very serious harm on him. What do you think happened? "This is awesome.
Right.
This is awesome." So, wait a minute. What's awesome? You love Jericho. You're so glad he's back. Now, these scary guys, we want to see them hurt Chris Jericho. I don't understand it, but that's the modern fan mentality. They just want, I guess I do understand it. They just want to be entertained. They don't care about the emotional investment of who we love, who we hate. Whatever's going to entertain me, that's the number one most important thing, is that I am entertained by what's happening here. Even if it means that a wrestler I like is getting hurt or in storyline getting hurt. I just want to be entertained.
I think this all boils. I think I just realized what makes me upset about the fans. The door's been flung open so wide in professional wrestling. There's no kayfabe anymore. They just all think it's fake. And they're looking at wrestling from an entirely different perspective. That, like, if somebody even at an armory I used to go to see wrestling, if somebody looked like they were hurt, the fans wanted to storm the ring and help them. I once saw a match with Tony Garea versus Victor Rivera, where Victor Rivera picked up a chair and brought it into the ring, and the whole place started to get up and surround the ring and threaten the referee, "Get that chair away from him." Of course, Garea got away, hit him with it, but he was thrilled.
Right.
But you know what I mean? It's like those were the days when people seemed concerned about the physical well-being of the competitors. Now I just think they want the cheap thrill. and they don't think anybody's getting hurt, even when they are sometimes. And I guess that's what bothers me is the fact that the door has been flung open so wide and there's no secrets anymore. And they have press conferences after the matches that you can stay tuned and hear people say why they did this and why they did this in the match. Maybe I'm just too yearning for the old feel, and I am the outdated host that will never be happy with the current product because it is what it is. I don't know. Maybe that's the reason.
Well, I remember you telling that story about Gurria and Rivera and the chair, and that was an example I was thinking of too at the shift of how, in the old days they would have actually tried to stop a
Yes,
guy from hitting a guy with a chair. Or I know they didn't really do tables back then, but if they had, they would have wanted to stop the guy from being put through a table. Whereas now they will boo if it doesn't come off, even if it's their hero that is in danger of going through the table. If the spot is stopped, like that is a way now that heels will get heat by threatening to put someone through a table and not doing it.
but the fans chant "We want tables," and the
Right.
Dudleys haven't wrestled in WWE for 20 years.
Right.
They just want that spot. I guess they don't get tired of it. Personally,
No,
I am tired of the table spot. I'm
I don't
even
need
more
to see
I
tables
I
anymore.
am even more tired of the guys getting flung on the announce table and breaking it all up. You know what? It happens every week and nobody gets hurt.
Right.
So, what's the point of it at this point? It's like a
Right.
polite greeting. I'm gonna throw you into Michael Cole's lap. Here you go.
There's
It doesn't have any effect now.
in my book, in the Gorilla Monsoon book, there's a part in there where I describe the first time they ever wrestled each other, of Bruno Sammartino and Gorilla Monsoon. And there's no video of this, but it's described in great detail in the New York Star Ledger, who had a reporter there covering it. And because it was at Roosevelt Field Stadium, I don't think it's still there anymore, in New Jersey.
Roosevelt Stadium, yeah.
Roosevelt Stadium, right? Roosevelt Field is the shopping mall, but
Right.
yes, by where the airport used to be. But so in the match, Bruno gets color at a certain point. He goes to the Gorilla, throws him to the outside. He hits the ring post, covered in blood. It was the greatest detail. I had to put it in the book because the reporter described it. This little old lady got up, like with a handkerchief, like Jesus going up on the cross, with Veronica with the veil. This little
Mhm.
old lady came up to Bruno and wanted to wipe the blood off his face to help him. And he didn't let her, because he waved her off and said, "Let me handle this. Let me get in the ring and do this. It's okay. You don't have to do that." But the level of concern,
Right.
genuine, real concern, and not just from a fan, but from a little old lady who wants to get up and wipe the blood off your face and help you in this match. It's like uh, another planet compared to now. It's like
Oh
another
gosh.
species of life form.
Bill Apter was there when Ivan Koloff beat Bruno Sammartino at Madison Square Garden for the World Championship, and I guess that was 71. And he said the crowd was in a hush, except for the sound of people weeping. For real.
Yeah.
We're never getting that back. We're never getting that back. We're never getting that degree of concern over it's just a loss. It was just a loss. He wasn't hurt. He just lost. And I don't think we're ever gonna get that type of adoration for a professional wrestler ever again because they
You're not.
believed that those fans believed in Bruno Sammartino. What do they believe in now? I'm not really sure.
Especially among adult fans. Like you'll see it maybe with kids, who will still have, like I see it with Cody Rhodes. There are like little kids, because my son, his friends, I know other, that they really, they look up to him. And he's just an example that popped into my head.
No,
But you're
now let me ask you, why do you think that is? Why he's and I agree with you. I see the reaction he gets from children and teenagers. So why him? What has he got that's different than other wrestlers in that regard?
I don't think it's well, I think he is a special talent. But I think beyond what he has, I think it's just how people change as they get older, because the very qualities that make a kid, a little boy, love a John Cena or a Cody Rhodes when they get older and hardened and cynical,
Mhm.
those become the same exact qualities that make them not like that person. So I think the kids love uh, Cody because he's a good guy. He talks about his dad and how much he loves his dad and wants to make him happy. They love that. My son mentions that all the time. My son said to me the other day when Cody won a match, out of the blue, he goes, Dad, I bet Cody's dad is really proud of him right now in heaven. Like he just said that out of the blue. And it's because Cody talks about his dad all the time.
Mhm.
So it's like he's relatable, he's down to earth, he's good, and it comes across he's decently good, but he also kicks ass. He's not he doesn't have the worst qualities of, say, like a Bob Backlund when people lost faith in him because he seemed like a wimp or a crybaby.
Mhm.
Cody doesn't have that. He's a stand-up guy. It's almost like he's like a mixture of some of these great heroes of the past. Like he's got certain elements of Bruno, like that. If you make me mad, I'm going to kick your ass. I'm not playing around. He's got that, but he's also got like that purity, that white bread, gee whiz of Backlund, blended in there. He's got the charisma of Dusty Rhodes a little bit, that kind of like larger than life. He blends all these things together so well. And I think people dig that, but what prevents maybe a grown person from being as into it as a little kid, aside from that cynicism, is also the knowledge of he's a guy playing a character on a television show,
Mhm.
which a little boy is not going to internalize that, you know?
Right. But you know what? I make these comments, I make these observations, but I will tell you what, I eagerly tune in to Raw every Monday night, especially since they moved to Netflix. I love the way it's presented. I think it's the most spectacular visual presentation they have ever done, especially the last 4 or 5 months. A lot of the talent, I think, is absolutely spectacular, from Rhea Ripley to, to Rollins to Kevin Owens to just keep going. I'm a big LA Knight, Mark. I think he's awesome. I just think there's so many of them are so talented. I just wanna see them work. I don't even care what the story. See, I'm different. I just wanna see them work. I don't even care about storylines. I think there's so much talent there that I just enjoy watching them get in the ring and do their thing. Maybe I'm an old fuddy-duddy, but that's enough for me.
And they're really good. I was talking to Adam Pierce when I had him on my show because about how you could say whatever you want about the WWE style. I know it's not for everybody, and you're going to get people that love AEW or that hate everything WWE stands for. But the thing about it is, for me, just from the point of view of craftsmanship and style and just performance, you're never going to find anybody, any talent anywhere in the wrestling business, anywhere in the world, not even just in the country, that are as polished and professional in what they do as the people in WWE. And for some people, though, that's exactly what they don't like about it. And fine, whatever. If you want your stuff more rough around the edges, fine. But
Mhm.
the polish and the refinement of the skill of professional wrestling performance in the ring is, you will find nothing better than what you find in WWE.
I know he's not directly responsible, but I look at Triple H the way I look at Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels can pick them out of a lineup and find the real talent and hone them and make them, you don't look at Saturday Night Live and say, they're not funny. Everybody they bring on the show has talent and they're always very, very funny. They're the best. And they don't go on to great careers. Triple H is the same thing. You will not find filler on a WWE roster now. You just won't. They're all honed professionals and they're ready. I can't think of anybody who, like I say all the time now, I don't see anybody who, quote, doesn't deserve his spot. They all do, men and women. It's amazing how they just pick the diamonds. That's it.
Yeah. And he's also more flexible than Vince was. He's not as, I find, ego driven as Vince was, in the sense of like, this is the way I want to do it. Nobody's going to tell me otherwise. Like, he's able to listen, which I think Vince used to be able to do back in the day. He's able to listen to what fans might want, or turn around and say, maybe I was wrong about this. This is working or this isn't working. Like the greatest example recently is Jey Uso winning the Royal Rumble.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. I know there were people that were like, "Oh yeah, I could definitely see that coming." And I'm thinking, "How? Are you Kreskin? Are
That
you are
that's
you
not what I'm reading. I was reading people who were outraged over the fact he won.
right?"
And
I
I'm
was going to
like
get to that.
"Why?"
Right. Right. No, I saw
First
that
of all, the
too.
fact that he won was kind of an upset, which makes it, to me, all the more entertaining.
Absolutely. And an upset, and not by, it'd be one thing if you had, Akira Tozawa win. Somebody
Right.
who's just nowhere. Nobody wants to see that kind of an upset. But when you have somebody that has some juice, that has some steam, that's been doing some things, but you just don't see them as a Royal Rumble winner, which I didn't see him that way. When that person wins, that's a cool surprise.
Mhm.
And, what I was saying is like people that were telling me, "Oh yeah, yeah, that was predictable." I'm like, on what planet?
Right.
There were 7 guys in there at one point towards the end when everybody had already come in. And I remember watching it with my friends and going, "Okay, out of these 7 guys," and I remember saying it out loud, the last one that I think has a chance of winning this is Jey Uso. Because you had Punk, you had Gunther was in there, right? Logan Paul, I think Randy Orton stuck around, and I'm
No,
going,
no, Orton wasn't in the match.
oh, what? No, not Orton. No, I'm sorry. He wasn't even in it.
Um, I think, I think Knight was still in,
There were big
and
people in there.
yeah, it's AJ Styles,
Yeah,
those caliber of talents.
and I remember going, Jey Uso would be, if I had to pick, he's the least likely, and the fact that he did it, I mean, I I can't remember a time when I was that shocked by the winner of the Royal Rumble. And then for people to say, I saw on a wrestling news site a report that said overwhelmingly negative backlash to Jey Uso winning the Royal Rumble. And I'm again saying, are we living on the same planet?
Yeah,
Did you watch Monday Night Raw?
exactly.
It was like the second coming when he came down to the ring. It was like if it was like the Beatles or something. I don't know what you're talking about when you say, yes, there was some negative reactions, but they are a small, small minority of fans that are saying that.
Jey Uso was so over on Monday Night Raw, I think it was 20 minutes before a word was spoken. It was all celebration. The celebration went on and on. That arm waving thing he does went on and on and on. I don't think anybody locked up for a match until minute 37 of that. It was close to 45 minutes, really, before a match started. And people
They
were entertained by the fact that they were watching a triumphant Jey Uso. I rest my case.
Yeah, and they played an encore of his entrance music just to get
Yeah.
the people going again, and that was real emotion. Like I said it on Twitter. No offense to pro wrestlers, but they're not known as being the world's greatest actors, and so you can tell when the emotion is real, and that was real. That was a
Mhm.
real moment. It was a special moment. It really felt good. And you really have to have some real blinders on to say, "Oh, nobody likes this decision." No, you don't like the decision, but
Right.
it's to deny reality to say that nobody likes this. That's completely blind.
Absolutely agree. I mean, I thought the reaction even at the end of the Rumble was positive.
Yes.
I didn't hear anybody moaning.
No, 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 not at all. People ate it up. Yeah. And
I
they were
and
shocked. I think maybe you had people that really wanted Cena to win, which is ironic. But
I think there are more than I originally would have thought that wanted him to win. I just
right.
maybe if it's nostalgia or what it is, but yeah, I think a lot of people were rooting for Cena in this match.
People just kind of felt like, well, okay, maybe they were hoping for Cena versus Cody, which could still happen because you've got the Elimination Chamber and that kind of thing. But for some reason, I think that might have been some of the disappointment. Maybe some of the people that were glad to see Cena back and maybe wanted to see him win. I don't know.
Well, he said a few words at the post-match press conference, and I'm reading on Facebook the next day. Look, he's turning heel. That's a perfect heel. I said, can you just let the show come to you, please? Right? nobody lets wrestling come to you. Everybody's a booker. Everybody's thinking, no, he's going to do this because, here's why. They didn't put him over, so now they got to put him over at the next. I'm like, I'm so tough. I like wrestling fans. I get along with everybody, but I'm finding the Facebook wrestling scene to be very, very hard to swallow. Only about 99.9% of the time, it gets to me. The
Yeah,
constant complaining. Don't you watch this stuff to enjoy it?
yeah.
Everybody's got to pick nits.
Because I still, I may criticize things and I may have my pet peeves and things, but I still watch it. I watch it because I enjoy it. I find things that I love and I enjoy in it. And I could also say, yeah, you know what? I liked it better 30, 40 years ago. I liked it better than now. And I would rather watch some of that old stuff sometimes. But that's no different to me than when my grandfather, may he rest in peace, who had been a Yankees fan for like 70 years, right up to the end, would say, it was better back in the days of Mickey Mantle and Joe D and Yogi Berra. And but I still watch it. I
Right.
still watch baseball. I still root for the Yankees. I love Paul O'Neill. I love that Jeter kid. It's that same kind of thing. Just
Yeah.
because you prefer it, maybe from when you were young, it doesn't mean you still can't enjoy it.
Exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't like about. I've lately in my old age, I've been kind of getting. I don't know what the word is. I guess a little disillusioned with Major League Sports, which to me, with each passing month, seems to be more of a money grab than it does the advocation that I used to easily enjoy in years past. Now you have to think twice about going to a ball game because of tickets and all this other stuff. I kind of like the simplicity of it when I was a kid. You could go for a few bucks. Now you got to really think about it if you want to go see to any sporting event. So
I
you know what I
know.
mean? It's like it makes me makes me glad I bought a really good TV. That's all because I did. I invested in one of those OLEDs. Oh baby, I mean I'm a happy camper. The resolution is just scary, so I don't really mind staying home and watching sporting events as much as I used to. But I used to be an active season ticket holder for baseball for
Yeah.
years. I don't know what to say other than maybe I'm just getting old. I think that's all there is to it. Right?
Yeah. I got priced out even to watching my Yankees on TV because of all this stupid Yes Network stuff. It's
Oh,
like,
really? What, so are you part of a cable system that doesn't have them at this point?
right. So in my town of Trumbull, we don't get cable vision. The only cable we had was Frontier, actually Frontier and Spectrum. Neither one of them carry Yes. So for me to watch, I would have to get the Yes app, which is more expensive than Netflix, Disney Plus, any streaming app you could think of. I don't like the Yankees that much that I'd need to
Yeah.
pay that.
They actually kind of merged, I think it's the Knicks and Yankees into something called the Gotham Sports app now. They're both on there instead of the Yes app. They merged it. And I think it's something like $32.99 a month or something for your team, just the one team.
That's ridiculous.
I know, which if you equate that to a year, imagine what that would cost you. Of course, nobody's going to watch it in the wintertime unless you're a
Right.
Brooklyn Nets fan. But
And I
I
feel
don't know.
terrible about it because, when they were in the postseason, when the Yankees they went all the way to the series and everything, I was loving it, because all those games are on regular TV and I'm watching it with my son. We're having a ball. I'm able to share that with him. He's getting into it. And I'm thinking, what a shame, man. Once it goes back to the regular season again, that's it. Can't watch it anymore. It really sucks.
Yeah, but you know what? I hate to show my age again. I remember in 1973 when the Mets were in the National League Championship Series. I'm in high school and I've got my little transistor radio. I'm hiding it in a book, but I'm holding the book up to my ear, right?
Yep.
And I'm listening to the playoff game against Cincinnati on the radio. And I didn't feel like I was missing anything because that's the only way I could get the game in upstate New York. I had to hear it on the radio. That's it. There was no TV. There was nothing.
I've actually
So
taken to listening to games on the radio again because I have no choice. I used to love listening to the Yankees. I was one of those Sterling and Kay guys. I
mhm.
used to love listening to them, but now I sort of do it by necessity, and there's no way I'm going to get my son to sit down and listen to a baseball game on the radio. I'd have to have him physically restrained into a chair. It's just not going to happen. So it's a shame that they do this. It's like they drive people away.
It's like everything. You can't just flip your TV on and watch what you want to watch. Now you not only do you have to find it, you have to pay at the ears for it. It's like
Right.
it hurts. It pinches a little bit. If you're a regular person, who really likes sports, it's an investment more than a vacation now. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
feels like an investment. I mean, there's somebody told me recently they had tickets to WrestleMania last year, and they had to choose a payment plan. Literal, like you paid
Uh-huh.
a little month, and then you own the tickets. They
Yeah.
offer you that now. I
My
rest my case.
I could remember my dad's a Mets fan. I can remember when I was a kid, his and my grandfather too, who was a Yankees fan, but the outrage that happened whenever it was, late 80s, early 90s, when they started to take some of the games, the regular season games, off of broadcast television and put them on cable only.
Right.
That was a huge deal because, like, with the Mets used to be able to watch pretty much every regular season game on WOR Channel 9, and there
Actually,
was a time.
that's a misnomer. I used to get Channel 9 on cable way back, the early '70s. We had cable by '73, I think.
Wow, good for
They
you.
did
I didn't
not
get it
show
till
they
92.
did not show every game on cable. You only got about half the schedule. Or
But
on
the
Channel
other
9.
games were
Channel
just
9, I
not
mean.
right, but where were the other games?
They weren't shown at all.
At all, okay.
I'm telling you, people tend to misremember that about they fantasize about the good old days where you could just turn on Channel 9, watch all the games. That never happened. It was
Well, I
always
guess
a half schedule.
yeah, he was just I guess you're right there, but I think he was frustrated by the fact that these games were gonna be televised, but they were
Right.
gonna be televised somewhere where you couldn't watch it for free anymore, and that was,
Right.
like, a big deal in, like, 1989, you know? That was a big deal.
It was a sports channel back then.
Sports Channel, that's what it was. Sports
Yeah.
Channel was the focus of their rage and anger. Yes, I
Yep.
remember it now.
Oh, we all went through that, and should I buy this? Can I afford it? That
Get the
was the deal
dish.
back then, yeah.
We didn't have cable in my neighborhood till 1992, so if you wanted
Really?
yeah, because it had to be wired under the street. So if you wanted cable channels, you needed to get a gigantic satellite dish and put it in your yard or on your roof, and so I didn't have any cable until 92.
Wow, in my little podunk little upstate town, we had cable in 1973.
I wish, man. I missed the
Yeah.
whole MTV golden age. I missed all the great Nickelodeon stuff that Gen Xers love to talk about in the
Mhm.
80s. I missed all the wrestling. The when I got MSG Network, it was like 3 months after the last MSG card that was aired on MSG Network before they stopped doing it.
Oh, those are such good memories for
I
me.
know.
When cable came in, we had the Saturday night, Channel 9 in New York, WWF at midnight, and then we still had the local affiliate, WRGB, showing the other show, the Championship Wrestling, and also we got both of them instead of just one because they were 2 different markets, and those were the days. I mean, you could feast on wrestling on cable. Then as we moved into the '80s, World Class got syndicated, and
I missed
I finally got TBS, got to see the NWA and just on and on stuff I never got to see. The mid '80s to me was like a golden era because there was so much wrestling on television. It was crazy.
I missed Georgia Championship Wrestling, all that stuff that I would have loved to have seen. By the time I got cable, the only wrestling that there was WCW, which I got to see finally on Saturday and Sunday nights. There was, the WWF stuff like Primetime Wrestling. ECW, maybe in its infancy. There was the GWF in Texas, which took
Right,
over for World Class.
right,
Think that was it, maybe. Oh, there was also the Savoldi show, IWCCW.
right. And that would
Uh,
float around.
right,
That was on Sports Channel for a while. I remember that.
right. But it was so it was paltry because I remember growing up in the 80s and I wasn't the hugest wrestling fan, but I had some friends who were, and they would talk about all the stuff they were seeing, because you still had AWA, World Class, Crockett, Mid South, all these
Mhm,
things.
mhm.
And then I get cable and it's all gone. I missed it. I missed it.
Bad timing, man. Bad
Yeah.
timing. But you know what? Again, the whole theme of this particular podcast is just to look back with fondness at the cool stuff that nurtured us and made us wrestling fans way back whenever way back one was for you. So, Brian, it's always good to see you. It looks like it's gonna be another really big year for you. I, like everyone else, has bated breath about the Monsoon book. I think this is when you first brought it up to me, I think last year that you were doing it, and I was like, man, you thought of that. I can't imagine that somehow you thought about doing a book about, of all people, Gorilla Monsoon, because I think the most younger fans, they just remember as an announcer on TV, but he had a varied past and an amazing story about probably the most unlikely superstar who ever became part of the front office ever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 32 years old, and he owned a quarter of the company. I mean,
I mean, amazing,
unthinkable. Yeah,
amazing.
unthinkable. Yeah, I'm excited. I can't wait. I really can't wait because I'm so proud of how it turned out. I can't wait for people to see this thing. I think if you love the Chic book, I never thought I would say this, but I feel like the Chic book was like a warm up to this book.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think the Shake book's my favorite. That's my favorite book. My favorite wrestling book.
Thank you.
And I that book was like being let out of jail. You detailed things. No, if you haven't read the Sheep book out there, Blood and Fire, guys, you will read things about the territories, about the mindset, about different eras one by one. It's like a history book, but it's more fun than a history book. Because it's wrestling. It's about the
Right.
greatest heel who ever lived. So I give that one. If you haven't read it out there, you've got to read it because it's nothing else like it. And if the Monsoon book is even half of that good, it's going to be a classic. So I don't know what to say, but other than I'm excited, I genuinely am.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting the feedback for sure.
Well, it's great to talk to you. Great to see you. We love you here. My listeners love you here on both of my podcasts, and I hope we get an opportunity to talk again really soon.
Me too. Anytime.
Oh, don't say that. I'm going to call you tomorrow. I'm kidding.
Hey, I need to do the entertainment one again. There's always stuff to talk about.
There always is. That's right.
Let me know.
And that one's on a hot streak. We just did a show. I don't know if you heard it. We did the Rock and Roll Replacements. What this is, the musicians who replaced famous musicians in famous bands. And some people don't even know that there were replacements in these bands. And we named Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham the greatest replacements in terms of commerciality in the history of rock and roll. Because they took a band that was like this kind of a cult favorite and turned them into major superstars in one album. And because they replaced Bob Welch. So if you think about that,
Right.
what replacements ever meant more to a band than Lindsey Buckingham's and Stevie Nicks? I can't think of anybody.
That's a huge one. Ringo Starr replacing Pete Best.
Yeah,
right?
but but we talked about that on the show too. The problem with that comparison, nobody ever heard Pete Best.
Right. No, you're right.
Right?
That is a major difference. You're
Yes.
absolutely right.
Right. I mean, the Beatles were still the club in Lancashire or whatever.
Sammy Hagar and Van Halen, but
We
a lot of
talked
people
about- we talked
I
about
feel
all
like
that
that
stuff,
was a
yeah.
step down, not up. I mean, I don't know.
See, that's what makes those type of conversations so much fun. It's like having a beer with some friends at a bar and arguing over batting averages and stuff like that in baseball. That's what makes the world go round, right?
Yeah.
All right, this is Brian R. Solomon. There's nobody else like him, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. I got to tell you, since I got back into wrestling and since I started doing this stuff seriously, it has been such an honor and privilege to get to know Brian R. Solomon and Al Castle. I mean, the new era of PWI guys, keeping that lineage going, keeping that magazine just rocking and rolling. It's just been a pure pleasure. Kevin over there, I remember buying some the rights to some Gary Miguel Cicluna pictures a few years ago. And what's happened to PWI is a publishing miracle. I think it's awesome. I think it's as good as it's ever been. And you got to go check out PWI, as well as Brian's Chic book, Blood and Fire. They just, use that to type it in a browser. You'll find it on sale virtually everywhere. If you haven't read it, it is a classic, non-parallel. It's as good as it gets in wrestling journalism. It really is. Let's put a bow on this one. Our website is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, where you can hear all of our shows. You can also hear our most recent shows at WrestleCopia.com. Also on our regular website, which is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, is our fan club. It's a little black box on the page, and you can find out how you can financially contribute to the show. Just a couple of bucks will do it. And it will help perpetuate both this show and the Outdated Entertainment Hour. Two shows we hope you're into. I am so happy with our Joe Puccio doing it again. The Rock and Roll Replacements is a high watermark for the Entertainment Hour. I just love that show. If you haven't heard it, check it out. I think we broach a topic that isn't brought up a whole lot. Again, it's outdated. It's old stuff. But you know what? I bet we jogged a few memories on that one, and I hope it's enjoyable for you guys to listen to as it was for us to put it together. It was just a blast. Write to us, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook, Bob Smith. I'm the only Bob Smith singer with BB King, and that's where I have most of my messages about this program and the other program. Also, you can find me at Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. At those venues, I am Outdated Bob one way or another. You'll find me there. Next week will be our debut with host Bob Smith and co-host Joe Puccio. You know what? You all know Joe. It's going to be an easy segue into what we're doing. We hope you enjoy it, just like we hope you've enjoyed our history here on the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. We come out virtually every Friday. There may be some gaps in the schedule. If there are, I will always let you know. I'll say, we'll be back in 2 weeks or something like that. Once in a while, life gets in the way. But most of the time, we come on each and every Friday. And if that changes, I'll let you know too. I'm Bob Smith. I've been blessed to be in the wrestling business for a long time. And I'm equally blessed to have all of you listening to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We will see you next time. Ringo has a new country album. Go check it out. And when he won a Grammy recently, he said, peace and love. Gotta love Ringo. I mean, come on.